All right, we have another Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel. As always, I am Josh Blaser, and we have another great discussion about game design planned today. My guest is a returning guest as well as game economist Ramin Shokrizade, and it's been a very long time, I think, since we last spoke. How are you doing?
Great. Yeah, I apologize that I got very busy when I got here at in Australia working on new tech for uh, blockchain game design and then starting some new projects. So I apologize for that.
That is all right. It's been in terms of how long it's been, I think the last time we spoke was like there's no COVID in the world. You know, that nice peaceful time many years ago when we last had our conversation.
Yeah, I think it was literally just weeks before I flew to with all my stuff to Australia.
But it's great to talk with you again for our discussion tonight. We're going to be catching up about mobile games, mobile design, as well as what Ramin is up to. So, I guess to begin with, what have you been up to since we last spoke in terms of like your projects and such?
Um, I flew out here to Sydney and completed the metagame design and economy for Gods Unchained at Immutable, and then worked on some unannounced projects and developed a lot of blockchain game design theory because there's hasn't really been a lot of like so far most of the work in the space has been fairly simplistic. Uh, and then I parted ways with Immutable, and I began work on two projects. One is Live Hive, which is a means of gamifying and providing games for businesses to help promote their brands, which is potentially a pretty big thing. And the other thing I'm working on, which I'm real passionate about, is a, a new very large as far as massive multiplayer and highly social um, ultra premium game called Cloud Walker,
Hmm.
which I liken to as sort of like um, the luxury version, the luxury adult version of Pokemon Go.
And I'll try to get some information out of you about that later on in this discussion. Question from chat: what is blockchain game design?
Okay, blockchain allows you to securely trade things between two people. The neat thing about blockchain is for a transaction to proceed, everything has to be authenticated and available, and then everything is done simultaneously. If anything is not where it should be or what it should be, then the whole transaction's terminated. So this allows you to trade things, potentially very expensive things, in games where before you'd wonder if you were going to get what you paid for, or if you were going to get ripped off. That just can't happen with blockchain. So
Hmm.
this opens the door to what I describe as like ultra premium transactions, uh, and these transactions don't have to include the developer at all. They can occur completely between players. Presumably, if you know what you're doing when you design these games, you're actually promoting that. You're promoting these interplayer trades, what I've described as uh, RMT2 in some of my papers in the past, which is like trades between expert players.
Okay.
Uh, this opens the door to much larger games, much larger asset transfers, uh, some very expensive things, and trying to figure out what it is that would make something expensive in a game is a lot of what I've been working on last year.
Hmm. And yeah, and that's definitely a discussion we can have a little bit more in depth tonight as well about getting that value or putting a price on content in games like this. So
Yeah. I mean, just putting a price tag on something doesn't make it valuable. It,
yeah.
it, it has to be perceived as valuable by the buyer.
Hmm. And we had a miniature discussion about kind of like mobile design on our Sunday show with Shark, and we are
Oh, okay.
referencing your name several times during that. We wanted to get you on for that discussion too.
Right. Well, I mean, you had me check out a couple games, and I did. So I've got feedback on those.
Hmm.
I found them both interesting, but also lacking in certain areas.
Yeah. And before we move on to that, like, continue with your discussion or with your work with blockchain. So, like, from your basic description, it's kind of reminding me a little bit of like the next step from something like Second Life, which
Mm-hmm.
Second Life obviously allowed players to basically be their own stores and buy and
Mm-hmm.
sell, and obviously not only transfer real money to premium currency, but premium currency back to real money as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of like almost like a basic idea of like what you're going for?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, going all the way back from in my case, when I was selling game assets in EverQuest, going back to 1989, the most and then later in Eve Online in 2003, the most important thing back when we were using eBay and such for trades was reputation. Players had to know that you had a good enough reputation that you would always deliver what you said you were going to
Mm-hmm.
deliver, and then people felt comfortable working with you. Uh, as IG took over the trading space, there were a lot of hackers, a lot of stolen assets, a lot of um, just shady things going on, and people didn't always know if they were going to get what they were paying for, or maybe they were buying stolen goods, hacked
Yep.
goods, and then their account would get banned after they made the transaction, which is actually worse than if they hadn't done the transaction at all. Um, so there needs to be a new way of doing this. And instead of developers just saying, no, you can't have any sort of real money transactions in our game, instead having developers encouraging that and working that into the game, because
Mm-hmm.
trade is actually a very strong attractor uh, for gamers. They really enjoy being able to, to earn and trade things in game.
Yep, definitely. And yeah, like you said about developers like trying to like push in that space. Like if we look at it a few years ago with Diablo 3, for instance, and when they started with
Mm-hmm.
the whole auction house, and go even further back with World of Warcraft, the auction house system. And
Mm-hmm.
there's always been like several issues with that. As you said, one of them being, the trust factor. How do I know what I'm getting is real? And that led to, obviously, as you're well aware, I'm sure as my audience, a whole gold mining, gold farming schemes and such that happened in the mid thousands. And then the other aspect of this is whether or not the game is designed fully to take advantage of that or to take advantage of the player base. Because for anyone who remembers Diablo 3, the game was notoriously designed to force you to use the auction house. Like, the game was made intentionally difficult, intentionally frustrating in terms of loot generation, so that the stuff that was really good was so good that you had to spend money or get really lucky, or if you didn't get that, you were basically just like worthless at the high level of playing Diablo 3. And
Well,
that, no, go ahead.
as you may recall, when I found out they were going to use a real money auction house in Diablo 3, I published a paper 6 months before the game came out and before I'd even seen the game. In fact, I've still never seen Diablo 3. Uh, Predicting in detail everything that was going to go wrong with Diablo 3 through the first year after launch. Everything I predicted came true. Um, and even though I published that and I assumed that people at Blizzard read my stuff, they ignored my warnings and went ahead with it, and that ended up not working out very well for them.
Yeah. And that also led into, I think, an issue I'm sure you've thought about. I know Shark in chat, he's working on his own deck builder and style game with his own, going to have his own economy system with that. Is the idea of getting the player to trust that to begin with. Because, and we'll talk about some of the mobile games that we both had a chance to play in the next few minutes. The problem is that whenever you have real money purchases or real money transactions in these games, players are very, especially like hardcore and core gamers, they're very skeptical as to whether or not it's actually worth it. Because, like we've said, like a lot of early mobile games were designed to appeal to non-gamers, the people who didn't grow up playing these games and knowing the tricks and the tactics that goes into them. For us, like when we see anything that has a dollar sign or a dollar currency next to it, we're going to look at that with a fine tooth comb to make sure is this actually going to help me, or is this just a scam trying to get my money?
Well, I mean, I'm potentially a whale on games. I've spent over $1,000 a year in some games that I enjoyed, but generally, uh, I don't spend money in games, or I don't spend more than maybe like $10 in a free to play game, because usually what they're asking you to do is pay for something that will progress you through the game, which will actually undermine the progression system, which
Yeah.
is what keeps you glued to the game. And actually, I know that my enjoyment of the game will actually be decreased if I spend money. Which so why would I want to spend money? Now, your general player may not realize this at first. They'll spend money thinking that'll make their gameplay experience better, and then they just enjoy the game less and don't understand why.
Yep. And
But this isn't to help your business model, because this just reduces the lifespan of your product.
yeah, but that's what Shark and I talked about on our Sunday show. That when we look at kind of the mobile market as a whole over the last decade, many of the games were very much anti-consumer, or more specifically, anti-free to play. They want you to spend that money or get stuck in that content, and it led into a lot of these games being designed around. Yes, there's 2 to 3 years of content if you don't spend $1 and you grind endlessly. You spend that money, you could probably finish that game in maybe 2 weeks, a month at most, and then where do you go from there?
Yeah, and then if it's a PvP game, you can end the gaming experience for everyone else by
Oh
zeroing them
yes,
out within 2 weeks.
yep, definitely, and I know you've had that. I think on one of our first discussions, you talked about one of the mobile games you were playing that you went, I think, all in or very much all in on like the VIP system, where you kind of try to become like the top player in the PvP server, and kind of that back and forth that can develop, which developer really loves. When people are competing with their dollars, but it just destroys that community and that system for everybody else.
Well, I mean, I recently went back to play, I think it was Ark of War,
Okay.
and to see if they had improved it over the years. And they've added a lot of content, but really the basic problems of gamers are 100% still there, which were that as soon as I dropped my shield, I had a uh, I had a high level player just come over and go out of his way to zero me out, even though there wasn't really any value to that player to zero me out,
Mm-hmm.
just to make sure there'd be no competition. And this is I talk about. This is what I've been doing a lot of work in the last few years about. What I call non-competitive activities in competitive games.
Yeah.
It may look like PvP is a competitive action, but most of the time it's actually non-competitive. You're trying to eliminate all the potential competitors so you can have a competition-free
Mm-hmm.
environment in a PvP game, which destroys it.
Yep. And like we've said, there's so much about kind of the psychology that goes in these games, the psychology of gamers, that most people don't really know, let alone think about. And it's led. I know we were at one point we are going to probably have a discussion about like toxicity and game studios or toxicity in general, but there's still so much about what it means to play these games that I don't think a lot of people really have comprehended.
Well, I mean, there's some pretty intense sociology going on here,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to psychology. And uh, game developers don't tend to be the most social people, and they don't tend to have the really be very sophisticated as far as understanding sociology and how social interactions work. So they're not capable of designing that in their games. A lot of times, their games are designed to promote aggressive behavior, and then players engaging in aggressive behavior. And then the developers will turn around and complain about toxic behavior coming from their players as if it's coming from the players instead of being responsible for having created that themselves. They'll 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 blame they'll blame players for the behavior the developer themselves is promoting, which I find very frustrating.
Yep, and that again is kind of like that issue. It's almost, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It was like the snake eating itself, or singing its own tail. There, that developers complain about toxic fan base or toxic gamers when the game itself is kind of set up to cultivate that. And I think One of the examples of a developer I really don't follow as much to know they truly have turned it around yet would be like Riot Games of League of Legends. That for a time, League of Legends was considered like the most toxic fan base, toxic culture of gamers like you could find in one place. And I know they try to have done a lot in terms of moderation. I think there's like a tribunal system and etc. But there's still stories and lawsuits about Riot Games as a studio itself that we're still like hearing like almost like on a year by year basis.
Well, again, you have to look at the source. If they have a toxic work environment, it does. Is it a surprise that they have a toxic game environment?
Yeah,
They're just reproducing in design what they know.
yeah, and I think like to like kind of carry this into mobile as well. Like as you've seen, as I'm sure we've all been like playing with a lot of the mobile games, or at least the ones that are being marketed. They all, or for the most part, they strongly encourage PvP play, and not only that, but guild interaction with that PvP play. It's not just you have to play this really well. You're going to get beaten by people, but if you're in a guild, that guild will say, no, you have to join us for this PvP because we need these resources, and if you don't help us, get out. And we've seen that kind of peer pressure develop in a lot of these titles.
Well, I'm a huge advocate of peer pressure. I think what are called peer effects are a huge motivator for people to
Yep.
be retained in a game, and a huge motivator for them to spend, along with something I call peacocking effects, where you get to show off
Oh,
to your
yes.
fellow players your abilities or your assets. Uh, but uh, most of the environments you're talking about are in what we would call an open world game, where you have your team basically has freedom to hunt out and attack other players at
Mm-hmm.
will. And again, you get this toxic environment where one team will just try to wipe out
Mm-hmm.
other teams, and like State of Survival I played recently, an open world game, uh, where you basically can spend an unlimited amount and become have unlimited amount of power depending on how much you want to spend, and players will rapidly just wipe out all the other players,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why you can see there's over 1,000 servers in that game, because once one team is basically zeroed out everyone else, competition ends in the game, and then spending ends because there's no point in spending. And so the process just starts over with a new server. People jump in and think, oh, it's a new server. I have a chance. Uh, I can
Mm-hmm.
actually enjoy playing the game
Until
until I
something.
get zeroed out
Yep.
for a little bit, and but the whole process just repeats because the game literally promotes you
Mm-hmm.
killing their server.
Yep.
The developers are begging you to kill their own server.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, that cycle just keeps going on and on in a lot of these titles. And again, it punishes free to play players, or it turns them into, I think you use the term, you call them bait, or, the target for a lot of these games. And the
The feeder fish
yep,
for the whales,
or for the shark in chat there. but
right?
But like we've said, like this is I think one of those big things. I know we've talked about this before, with just how sustainable these games are, and we've seen over the last decade that the majority of these mobile games don't last. You get the few, kings, Clash of Clans, Angry Birds, what was it, Clash Royale, Farmville, like those cells that become like the major names, and everybody else just kind of fades into the mist after like a few months or a year.
Well, a lot of that has to do with the platform providers. They charge so
Yep.
much in order to put your game on the platform uh, that it's just pretty much impossible. The games that are already established, the reason they're successful isn't the quality of the game. It's just that the platform has favored them by
Yep.
giving them free advertising.
Oh
So the
yes.
user acquisition costs are much lower than they are for newer games, and newer games actually need lower user acquisition to get started because no one knows who they are. So
Yep.
you're killing off the new potentially promising entries into the field, and you're favoring the old ones, which by and by aren't particularly high quality. They just persist because of lack of competition.
And to build off of that, I guess I have two questions for you then about like general like mobile related. The first one, you mentioned, of course, going back to the game that you played a long time ago. Like in the mobile scene, are there any examples of games that have managed to either turn things around as a complete redesign, or games that have managed to survive thanks to constantly changing? Or is it very much a case of
I would say no.
yeah,
And the reason this doesn't happen is because the mantra, the generally accepted wisdom in the major mobile game developers today is data driven design.
mhm,
And data driven design means you you don't do anything unless the data suggests that it's safe or appropriate to do. And that means you don't do anything you haven't already done because you don't have any data on things you haven't done.
mhm.
So this data-driven design is great for iteration, but kills innovation. So you're not seeing the innovation described because data-driven design is considered the the gospel in mobile today.
Yeah. And then I guess the second part of that question, I know when we first did our conversation, we talked about how for a lot of mobile games, they're trying to keep somebody playing for at least 2 weeks, like 15 days. They're about to get them invested in the game. For like some like the bigger name or some of the more popular examples, is there like a accepted time frame for like how long they're in business in order to like call them a genuine success in the mobile market?
Um, Not that I know of, and I don't really know what they may be persisting, but I don't know how much of that's actually turnover or how much is staying power.
Yeah.
I mean, the two games I meta designed for wargaming, uh, that I World of Tank Splits, which is mobile, and World of Warships, which is not mobile. I designed both of those in early 2014, and they're both still going strong, but they were designed to be long tail games, to engage players over years and have players spending over years, and they were successful in that regard. But that's generally not how other games seem to be designed.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue into kind of talking a little bit more about your thoughts on modern mobile design and kind of what you've been seeing as well. And for the chat, if you have any questions for us about these topics, please let us know in the comments. So, to kind of kick off this section, I gave Ramin a small list of some of the mobile games I've had a chance to play. Stuff like Arc Knights, Illusion Connect, Genshin Impact. I may have mentioned Guardian Tales, I'm not sure. That was another one that I had a chance to try out. And, like, for myself, like, again, with everyone being stuck inside these last feels like it's been like a few years now, but for over this course of this year, I've been playing more of these mobile games to kind of like see what's been going on with it. And it does seem like some of like the newer examples are going in different directions, maybe almost by necessity compared to what we saw 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, there's definitely some new things being tried.
Hmm.
I'm uh, but with mixed results, and no one's really hitting it because they don't. I don't know. My belief is that there's just core tenets of game design theory that are not understood by these teams, or having been in these teams myself, a lot of times just because someone's telling them to do stuff that they may know is not going to work, but they don't have the authority to say no to this person.
Hmm. Yeah. And it is kind of interesting to see like where these games have gone. Like, I guess let's start with like the big name example, and that would be Genshin Impact. That this was a game that for like console and PC audiences, they had no idea what this game was. Like, it just appeared, out of the blue one day. For the mobile scene, I know mobile sites, mobile YouTubers, and streamers have been talking about this game for months, and it was officially released. I want to say mid September, and people are still talking about this. It seems to be very much the, big budget, cross-platform mobile game. And I played it like the first week, maybe like week and a half, and I kind of got tired of it. And I want to get your thoughts onto it because I think what you just said there about, trying something new but either not understanding the whole process or not being able to, fix what's broken is kind of hamstringing some of these modern mobile games.
Well, when I was saying that, I was thinking probably primarily of Genshin Impact.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, along with Eve Echoes, it's an attempt to bring a really high-end PC type open world game into mobile and retain that graphic quality and that freedom of movement, which I think uh, is fairly amazing. It's and it makes for great videos, trailers, maybe even YouTube videos, but it doesn't make for a good game, unfortunately. And the reasons may be a little bit subtle. The One of the main things is these types of games require 100% immersion, just like their PC equivalents, and that's not what mobile is for. Mobile is the advantages of mobile is you can take it anywhere and do it anytime. But you can't take advantage of any of those advantages of mobile if you have to be 100% immersed. If you're on a bus, you can miss your bus stop. You could get mugged if you're in the United States and on the bus and not paying attention. And if you're trying to walk around, you could get hit by a vehicle or anything. Many things could go wrong if you're trying to be 100% immersed. You just can't do it when you're walking around on a mobile device. So I really couldn't play Genshin Impact while walking, for instance. It just requires too much concentration, especially if I'm in a battle. Those battles really seem to require you to do a lot of kiting. Very, very mental labor intensive. I would get fatigued rapidly trying to play that game, so I wouldn't be able to play it as much as I normally play in a day. This all reduces the utility of the game to me.
Yeah, and let's see.
This is why you see auto battlers are becoming very popular in mobile games, and appropriately so, because that's one way that you can reduce the amount of immersion, but still keep the player engaged.
Yeah. And I think like even for games that do have like more involved gameplay, something like Arc Knight or Zerlane, they still allow you to just go on auto mode after you've cleared
Yeah.
a map or even just playing the game generally. I think for that very reason. And that was one of the things that I noticed with Genshin Impact, like you said, that it's not really like an idle or a relaxed game. Like this is not something that you can play and do something else at the same time, especially if you're trying to explore this world. And it feels very much like, as you said, like it feels like almost like in between, whether in between, the mobile design with the gotcha impact or the gotcha focus, and trying to be like that next PC or console title that they want you to sit down and play it for 2 to 3 hours, just focus on that and not do anything else.
Yeah, but why not just use a PC for that if that was the case?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point? Yeah, it's amazing you managed to squeeze this onto a mobile device, but why? The mobile audience isn't going to take full advantage of whatever you just did because you didn't match the product to the behavior and the consumer needs of your new audience.
Yeah. And I was watching one of the more prominent like mobile streamers who was talking about this in terms of the turnover rate of Genshin Impact, with a lot of free to play players leaving the game. For like the people who came from PC or console to play Genshin Impact, who don't have a mobile background and kind of being hit by a lot of those quirks of mobile design. The grinding, the having to do the daily events, and of course, the incredibly low chance of making progression through their gotchas and their banners.
I couldn't even figure out how to even move in Genshin Impact for about 5 minutes, and then I finally realized that you had to pretend there was like a mouse wheel in the lower left
Hmm.
corner, which wasn't even visible, and kind of like move your thumb up in the lower left corner to move forward, because I was trying to like tap on the
Hmm.
screen or move like this. It wasn't working, and that's actually similar movement control to what we had uh, in World of Tanks Blitz, but there was no. I didn't see anything that told me I should be doing that. So
Hmm.
it could be very frustrating to a player that didn't know that that was a way to do things.
Yeah. And I played it on the PlayStation 4 using a gamepad. And as somebody who predominantly plays a lot of action-based games, I found that the whole UI to be a little bit on the cumbersome side, trying to make use of it. And I know when they develop it, they design the game explicitly to be, mobile, PC, and gamepad focus. And I think trying to fit all that into one design kind of hurt from a UI standpoint.
I mean, it wouldn't matter if it was all more turn based or more auto battling, but since it requires uh, you know very precise motor control, especially when you're kiting,
Oh,
um,
yes.
it makes it a huge hurdle for play, especially for older players, which I don't think they're like even considering involvement
Hmm.
of. But those older players have more money to spend if you can hook them. They're much more likely to become a whale for you.
Yeah. Now, speaking about spending money, what did you think about how they implemented or designed their gotchas and banners? For those of you who are watching don't know what we're talking about, Genshin Impact features an incredibly low drop percentage for their best stuff. It's at 0.06%, according to what the game posted on its notes.
Well, I mean, I read the reviews. A lot of people were complaining about that, but I personally didn't really see the point in even getting that far in the game, because like your main character uh, is on paper stronger than this pyro gal that I picked up, uh, but the pyro gal is an archer, and if I
Oh, yeah.
want to really burn a lot of brain cells, I can kite like mad and actually do better with her by avoiding direct combat entirely. But that's just so much work, uh,
Mhm.
and I suspect a lot of these other characters are a lot of the same thing. It's like, well, yeah, maybe it's stronger on paper, but the actual implementation might not be that great, or it might be just too much work.
Mhm.
So I don't really, and in any case, it probably just speeds up the battles a little bit, but it's going to be the same thing. So I
Mhm.
don't really know if the utility is that high in having a better character.
Mhm.
I also don't know if there's like group play in that game, because if there isn't, then you're not getting the peacocking effects, which might also save the business model.
There is multiplayer. I did not do. I only ever really did anything with it. It's kind of like being like hidden underneath some of like those systems. For myself, I played it to about I think adventure rank. I want to say 25, 26, somewhere in that level, and it was just really starting to feel like a grind to me in terms of playing that game. And it kind of, I think, falls into some of the similar traps a lot of open world games have. That it's here's three tasks, now repeat them for the next 40 hours all over the map. And you're just really doing the same thing. It's just maybe you're, in a grass environment versus a jungle environment.
I mean, a lot of these games are built on Excel.
Hmm.
That's why they seem to be so fascinated with hiring people that are good at Excel. And when you play it, you can feel like you're playing the Excel spreadsheet. Oh, these are the three items that drop right now.
Hmm.
And later on, there'll be six items that are just slightly upgraded versions of the previous three items, and that's what'll drop. And you're just going through the spreadsheet, row
Hmm.
by row as you play, and it becomes very predictable.
Yeah.
and everything's very carefully controlled to make sure they know how long it'll take you to get through each stage. And I don't know, do you want to be that rat chasing that cheese for hours? And and I think it ultimately just comes down to fun pain,
Mm.
where they're intentionally trying to bore you with their game, hoping that if they bore you sufficiently, you'll become frustrated and spend money to become less bored.
Mm.
Um, I think that's a very weird way to treat your players. Again, it's this player antagonism approach, and even if it's successful and the player spends, they're just going to experience the same thing over and over again, but on a different row in the Excel spreadsheet, which means that they could do it again, but then they'll be like, oh, well, that didn't really help me last time, so why would I do it this time?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point about kind of boring the player into spending money because it's something that, and we'll talk a little bit about Arknights next, but a lot of kind of the hero collector gotcha focus kind of games, what I've seen them do is they explicitly save, unique abilities or, special powers for their 5 or 6 star characters, their SSR, whatever, high rank you want to describe it as. And everybody else does nothing, The most common characters, all they do is just stand there and, smack a guy with their sword for 20 minutes. And one of the issues I had with Genshin Impact was again that the majority of that gameplay was just me mashing the same button again and again for 2 hours, how long it took me to complete those dailies. And if I got one of those 5 star characters, they're going to do something special or unique. But if I don't get them, you know, what else is there to do in this game other than just mashing that same button again?
Yeah, I mean, if you want that level of immersion where you want to completely space out, then maybe there's some value in that. But for somebody like me who I actually work for a living while I'm playing games, and I'm thinking about like, how am I going to solve this design problem or that? And I might be gaming while I'm thinking about that, just something as a relaxing thing to do. And um, I can't do that if am involved in that level of immersion. If somebody messages me and needs help with this problem or has a question about this, I can't do that at the same time. So I pretty much only play turn-based games or similar type of things
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise they just prevent me from making money, and uh, and that's the money that the developer wants from me. So what do they want me to do nothing and not have any money, or do they want me to be able to play their game while making money so that I can give the money?
Yeah. And seeing about like turn-based design, that's a good segue into Arknights. And Arknights I found to be very fascinating. It's the game that I kind of started to get really into before I started playing Illusion Connect, which is kind of the one that I'm doing right now.
Hmm.
And Arknights, like to me, it felt very much like almost like a next generation mobile title. Like that was kind of like the first one that I started to play after I stopped playing Marvel Strike Force. And what I found to be very interesting, kind of led to me writing a piece about mobile design, was his idea that there is gameplay to Arknights. Like it's not just whoever spends the most money automatically wins. And it's something that I found with Illusion Connect as well, and again with Arknights, that yes, I can, roll the gotcha. I can get that SSR, that 6 star character. That doesn't mean anything if I don't know how to play this game or how to organize my teams. And I know Shark in chat, he's been playing, I think, Bleach Immortal Souls. I think that's the mobile game that he's been playing. And we had a whole discussion about how, he organized his teams and set that up. So, like, the commonality is that it isn't just a way money is not just the answer in these games. It's not, as we were going back or we were discussing PvP style games earlier, where money was very much the answer. I spend $500, get the best character or the best gear. I'm the top player on the server. In these games, you spend $500, get SSR characters. If you don't know what you're doing, you're not making progress.
Yeah, no, I really liked Dark Knights. I thought that my my personal skill development mattered.
Hmm.
Trying to figure out how to do this or that. Just having the strongest characters wasn't really necessarily helpful on some maps. You had to
Hmm.
uh, really know how to, like, you had to have the proper diversity
Yeah.
and know where to put every unit. Like I seem to have a very hard time recruiting support characters. I finally got one support character. It's
Hmm.
only a 3 star,
Yeah.
but I could see it would be so useful to have a support character on these maps who basically just made for support characters that um, that I mean I ended up taking that 3 star and dropping a bunch of resources into it to promote it
Hmm.
because and it's actually easier to promote a 3 star than it is a 4 or higher star.
Yeah.
So so really there's a lot of advantages of a 3 star over a 4 or 5 or even 6 star. I don't really even use my 6 stars that much because they're their utility is only very limited and kind of more towards the end of a map. And you probably either won or lost the map by the time you even bring it in anyway. So that's
Hmm.
it's the units I bring in first and almost always like my vanguards that
Yeah.
I'm working up the most because I use them the most. They have the most influence on the map.
Yeah.
Um, so just bigger isn't better in that game. I like that.
Yeah, and going back to what I was saying earlier about like Genshin Impact, kind of like having utility or uniqueness. That one of the things I really did appreciate, and something I see in Illusion Connect as well, is that while you have the different classes, when you get to the higher ranks, they have unique quirks and unique abilities on top of it. So one 5 star tank is not the same as another 5 star tank, or same as a support, and so on. So it leads into that kind of advanced thinking. And I came really close to spending money on Arc Knights, but it started to get frustrating to me to play. So I wanted to ask you, like, were there any cracks in that game's design that you notice?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just because it's better than the competition doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's maybe less bad. I don't know. It's extremely polished. It's got fantastic voice acting. I mean, uh, my partner who is Asian. I mean, she listens to me playing this, and we're just cracking up at the voice acting because it's so hilarious. But it's it's quite good, and um, uh, so I really appreciate that, and that's a nice touch. So it would make me much more likely to want to spend on the game. But
Hmm.
with the way they're trying to encourage spending is they make the game very easy in the beginning, so that you feel really strong and it's very easy to practice and
Hmm.
stuff. But within the first day of play, the difficulty is ramped up so far that I can't even complete the maps. So what am I supposed to do in that situation? I'm supposed to say, "Oh, okay, now I'm frustrated after 24 hours." Am I supposed to engage in some sort of fun pain loop where I'll spend to reduce the
Hmm.
frustration so that I won't be frustrated until tomorrow, and then I have to spend again? Um, I'm just going to move down the again. It's just kind of like I'm moving down the Excel spreadsheet a couple rows, but then I'm stuck with the exact same problem. It becomes less and less very rapidly, much less about my skill and
Hmm.
much more about how it doesn't matter how perfectly I do this map. I'm going to get steamrolled by units I can't even affect.
Yeah, and that's what I felt. I got to about, I think, story chapter 3 or 4 in that game. And
Mm.
what ended up happening was I had, like, my preferred strategy. I had characters set up to stun or slow them down. Everything was all good. But nobody was able to touch anything because the stats are so. I was so weak in terms of leveling up characters. So even though I had the perfect strategy, it didn't matter if the enemy has 10 times the health and 10 times the armor than my guys. So the only option was to spend most of the day just grinding out resources. And
Yeah,
it just got a point
that
where I was like, it was either that or, cross my fingers and hope I get a perfect 6 star character. But then, like we said, that just leads to more grinding because I have to grind that character up so that they're able to do something.
yeah. Today I'm like planning on spending 80 or 90% of my energy on the game just grinding XP items so that I can bring the average level of all my operators up so that they have some chance against what they're fighting right now. Because right now it is like the only units that the units that are coming out are such high defense that they're literally invulnerable to 80% of my units. The only units that can even affect them are the ones using magic
Mm-hmm.
arts in this game, and and those characters are the ones with the highest cost to bring into the map. So by
Mm-hmm.
the time you have enough deployment points to bring them in, you probably already lost the game. So you need to have you need to level up even the units that can't affect your opponents just so that they'll live long enough to buy you time to bring in the ones that can.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a full grind and yeah, I mean early on if I had all the 6 stars, you'd probably get more bang for your buck blowing your XP items on them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, doesn't that just make the game easier and move you 3 lines down the Excel spreadsheet before it gets hard again?
Yeah. And speaking about Arknights, this is kind of like off topic but still related. It's something I've been thinking about a lot of the mobile games I've played. That has there been any studies or research onto having these kinds of, I don't know how to describe it, almost like a sub game or a subsystem that kind of is either a distraction or it's there for additional resources. And what I mean by that, in Arknights, you have that whole base building. I'm sure you've unlocked that part. You put the various rooms, you put people in there. Azure Lane has it's kind of like a living room that you build. Illusion Connect has it. Guardian Tales has a Farmville esque grinding area. I guess why do we see so many games have like some kind of secondary area or system? Like, is there like a design or like marketing approach for it?
Well, I mean, the more stuff they have for you to do, the figure the more you'll be engaged, and
Mm-hmm.
you're less likely you're gonna get bored. Especially if it's like relaxing content, like base building is relaxing content, whereas trying to figure out a real time battle is not relaxing content. So you need to you know give them time to cool off between your high intensity, high stress activities, but something more relaxing. But that I mean that's all good. The biggest problem with Arknights isn't any of the ones we mentioned so far. It's that there aren't any pure effects. Without pure effects, what's the point of having cool stuff? Moving 3 rows down the Excel spreadsheet isn't going to help you at all. But being able to show off your 6 stars to your friends or your teammates that may not be friends, um, that's 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 actually gonna have more juice for you. But then if they know you just bought them, you didn't earn them, then those pure effects may actually turn to toxic effects where they don't like you because you outspent them.
Yeah. Or on the opposite side, if you're playing a PvP focused game, if you don't spend that money, then people are going to look down on you as to, why are you still using the 3 star characters? We need a full 5 star team in order to do this raid or fight this other guild. Spend
Yeah,
the money or get out.
yeah, or you got zeroed out and you're a goner
Hmm.
if
And
it's an open world game where they can attack your assets.
yeah, and I guess building off of that, earlier we discussed about this idea of putting a giving value to your content, whether it's value to play or value to pay. And I kind of want to build off of that with what I've been playing with Illusion Connect, because Illusion Connect right now stands as the record for the most I've spent on a mobile game, and that was $15 for their one-time like VIP purchase. And like for me, like from like a gamer point of view, I saw it as it's $15. It's essentially me buying the game, and I get weekly summons for free, and it's a lifetime one-time purchase. And I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of like lifetime purchases versus the games that just have that endless spend, and which one would be more of value for people or gets them to spend money more.
Well, I mean, I bought the 1 year subscription to the Stellaris mobile, hoping that it would be good.
Mm-hmm.
I like those types of long-term subscriptions, but they only work if the game is built to have long-term play. And that Star Wars game, like many open world games, is just whoever has the most spends the most will run around and zero out everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the threat generated from that, usually all the players will try to join that person's guild or team, and this is what I call an anti-competitive action. They're all trying to join that team so that they won't have to compete with the people on that team, and then they have that team literally had more power than all the other teams combined on the map, and so they could just go out and zero anyone at will without any repercussions, without any competition, and then all competition ended. That's not a competitive game. It's not even interesting. So why play it? So I didn't even play that for more than a few weeks, even though I bought the long-term subscription.
Mm.
Open world games tend to do that. I mean, the game I spent the most money on ever was Waves of History, and I got so good that on open world I could fight 50 players simultaneously to a standstill for months. But the thing is, in that game, you get pre-made accounts. Like, especially the Russians do this. We'll get like 600 pre-made players, meaning I know exactly who they're going to be teamed with, what they're going to do the first week or two, who they report to, and they just come in and they just zerg everything like locusts and just zero out everyone else on the map, so that they win the server fairly quickly. And that's again, it's an anti-competitive maneuver. These are 600 players who don't want to compete, so they organize to make sure they can eliminate any competition immediately, so that they don't have to compete. But if they're not in that type of game, but they're not competing, they're also not spending.
Yep. And that, I think, is another very interesting point about a lot of the PvP center or PvP focus mobile games. That the ones that I saw, what they often do is they give you the most resources for PvP play, again, to incentivize it. But the problem is if you're so good at PvP that you get all those free resources, you don't need to spend any more money because essentially you're just getting the game for free at that point.
Yes, but I mean, if the game is about spending,
Mm-hmm.
like, a state of survival, then it really won't matter what your skill level is, because if you spend enough money, you can just zero out anybody anyways.
Yep. And I guess when it comes to, again, to like putting a price tag on this kind of content, as we said, you've had a chance to play some of the more modern entries. You play a lot of the mobile games as well. Have there been any differing trends or new things in terms of what's popular in terms of monetization in mobile today that compared to what could have been maybe 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, I mean, other than the stuff I'm building, no, not really. And in my case, I, I wouldn't, I haven't been able to convince any of the large studios to work with me. They want to do things the old way. So I had to go out and seek investors and go through this whole process, which is a lot of additional skill sets I have to develop that are tangential to game design. But I have to do it if I want to go through the process to make a game using my methodologies. I have partners, which are fantastic, which make things easier for me. And it takes longer for these things to go to the market, just because I have to build all that infrastructure instead of it already being ready-made in a AAA studio. But the AAA studios don't want to try new stuff because they may perceive it as high risk, or it's difficult to guarantee that it'll be successful. And to be honest, they don't read my papers, so they don't understand the things that have changed in game design over the last 10 years.
Yeah. And I have my third book on roguelike design coming out next year. I hope developers read that about kind of how to make a good roguelike. And I think what you just said there is very interesting about still adhering to old monetization models, because even with all the newer mobile games I played the last few months, I'm still seeing the same things in them from 5, 6 years ago, specifically energy mechanics. Like, even Genshin Impact, despite being this open world grand game, still has energy in the form, I think it's called resin, that you get daily. And
Hmm.
obviously it's a popular system to keep people playing, or specifically stop them from playing unless they spend resources. But it feels like the industry should have moved away from that, I think, at this point.
I actually like energy mechanics for some reasons that are different than the way they're used now. But
Mm-hmm.
I like them to gate access to my game economy. But
Mm-hmm.
since these games you're talking about don't have game economies,
Mm-hmm.
at best they have what I would call a game budget, which
Mm-hmm.
is all the transactions occur between the player and the developer. So that's, to my eyes, that's not an economy. Economy is when there's transactions
Mm-hmm.
freely between players, and they don't want this because they fear this.
Mm-hmm.
So they eliminate these economies and replace them with budgets. And in the budget, everything's tightly controlled. So in their case, they're just trying to restrict your energy and then charge you for more energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do it because I don't want somebody to just kill my economy by running a bot 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I forgot to ask you about, I want to get your opinion on when it comes to kind of gotcha and banner design today compared to kind of the loot box focus that we saw 5 years ago, and certainly from like AAA developers today. One thing that I see that kind of interests me, and I was talking to Shark about this on our show, is that many of them these days have this idea of quote unquote a pity mechanic. As in,
Hmm.
you can spend, X amount of money, get as many rolls as you want, but after, let's say, 70 rolls, 100 rolls, whatever the developer gives you, you get that character for free. Like, there is a guaranteed point that you can spend money on these banners and you will just get it. Now, obviously, there's a 0.6% chance, a 2% chance, whatever, you can get it far sooner. But there seem to be designed that there is an intended cap on how much they want somebody to spend on any given banner. And that to me seems different than what we saw from loot box design, where it's just, that endless money sink. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, when they're mostly posting the odds, hopefully
Mm-hmm.
accurately, sometimes not. There's a lot of complaints that in Arknights the posted odds are not accurate and they're actually worse than what's posted. But the this movement was forced by regulators that demanded that in gotcha that they actually post the odds because sometimes the odds were ridiculously low. And because it's random, you'd never know whether they were just super low or whether you were just unlucky. Now that they've shown the odds, now people are like, wow, okay, with 0.6% chance of getting something, yeah, on average maybe I'll get something after 150 draws, but there's no guarantee I could get something even within 300 draws. So by putting a guarantee, then at least there's some sort of fixed value instead of it being completely random whether you get value. I mean, I talk about this in my article on how the ESRB was promoting children's gambling. And I talked about how if you sent your kid to the market to buy a loaf of bread, and to buy a loaf of bread, they had to spin on a roulette wheel to see whether they actually got the loaf of bread. And your kid can come back crying after having spent $20 and they didn't get the loaf of bread because the store wouldn't give it to them because they didn't win it on the roulette wheel. I mean, and no adult would allow their child to be subjected to that in a store, but they don't know about it and they just seem to be okay with it in games.
I just picture like a dystopian story that's just like all centered on life becoming about loot boxes and gotchas now. Everything must be rolled.
Well, why is it okay in games and not okay elsewhere?
Yeah.
Because
And
you have dystopian leaders who are quite intentionally creating this dystopia for us. And again, it's this competitive attitude towards gamers where they see that as us as their players as an adversary to abuse and use all these mind tricks on instead of just being upfront with us.
mm-hmm. And as a quick kind of somewhat of a tangent, I wanted to get I wanted to ask you when we last spoke, like at the start of this year. I know we were both looking at kind of that loot box law that the United States was preparing, and then of course the pandemic hit, and that just scuttled everything for the rest of this year. Has there been any movement or any discussions about that you've heard on your side?
Well, well, I mean, you have to realize up to at least now in the political climate in the United States, it's been extremely, I mean, unprecedentedly anti-regulation.
Hmm.
Corporations are just, free to run amok and do whatever they want. So any attempts at regulation, all the regulatory bodies have been gutted. So any sort of regulation, even if it's makes a lot of sense, is going to have to wait for the institutions that would regulate to be rebuilt almost from scratch.
Hmm. All right. Let me see. Yeah. And like we were saying, like the whole loot box model is just very anti-consumer, and kind of like what we kind of see from mobile as well. And it's been kind of one of the major points of a lot of our discussions. Um, I guess like to build off that with some of the more modern examples, I think as you said, like from playing Arc Knights and Genshin Impact, on one hand they do feel fairer or better compared to some of the examples we've seen previously. But on the other hand, it's still very much not the most consumer friendly model for video games.
Well, I mean, you at least are starting to post odds, and
Hmm.
that's just because of regulatory efforts coming out of primarily Europe and also in Asia. Uh, and for these developers that want to publish their games worldwide, even if they wouldn't have to do that in the United States, they do it anyways because they want to be able to sell their games to people in Europe if they're English localized.
Yeah.
So that's where you're seeing these positive movements. It's not coming from the United States. We're
Hmm.
basically like dead last as far as
Hmm.
taking care of our consumers. But these are all positive changes, and I think as a player, when you can see and just do the rough math and say, oh, okay, they're selling these characters for 500, 1,000, $2,000, and you start to think, oh, is that really worth it to me?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're not. So even though the games are getting a lot more polished, a lot more sophisticated,
Hmm.
I don't think you're necessarily seeing a much increase in spending because players are like, oh, this doesn't look like a good idea.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I noticed, especially over the last 5 6 months of playing some of the newer mobile games, is that production values have grown in leaps and bounds compared to
Mm.
5 6 years ago. Again, stuff like Arc Knight. There's one based off the property Seven Deadly Sins. Like just like pick like any new or upcoming mobile game, and if you know you are looking at this on Google Play Store or the App Store, it looks very much like a console or almost like a current gen game that we would play on the PC or console. But once you get into it, I think this is kind of like that risk that we see that yes, they are more complicated, yet they're more in depth, but they're still tethered to the same monetization systems, the same kind of tricks and tactics used to get people to spend money. Another game that I tried was Exo's Heroes. This is another one that's kind of like making the trends. And within like 30 minutes of playing it, I'm being bombarded by, pages of different currency I have to worry about. No idea, what any of these characters are actually doing. And it just felt like, do I even want to try and learn this game? Like, is there even any reason for me to spend money if I have no idea what's going on in it?
Well, I mean, I look at games like Plarium's Raid Shadow Legends,
Mm-hmm.
where they've used they have photorealistic animation based on motion capture that just looks amazing. And I look at that and I go, wow,
Mm-hmm.
I could make so much money with my designs if I had like, content of that quality to go along with them. And I think, wow, what a waste that they put all that production work into such a weak or antiquated Excel spreadsheet monetization model. Uh, I mean, I'm sure it makes money, but it just seemed to me like such a waste because there's so much potential there to make some really cool stuff, and they're just the metagame design that should go along with that is moving at a snail's pace, whereas the production quality is just skyrocketing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I did finally try Raid Shadow Legends, I think a month, maybe a little bit over that, a month ago. And yeah, like it looks really impressive. And then I played it and it just felt like every other kind of RPG turn based mobile game that I've seen or I've tried, over the last few years.
Yeah, well, it's because it is. It's the
Yeah.
same. It's pretty much the same Excel spreadsheet. It's just with a higher production value on it.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm not sure we talked about this specifically, but I want to get your thoughts on this in terms of marketing. That there's a very nasty trend that I've been seeing, both in terms of like mobile and even just like on like just advertisements of people advertising mobile games with like just completely false
Oh wow.
footage.
Oh, I see where you're going. Oh,
Yeah.
I looked at some of these just ads for stuff, and it's like that's not in the game at all.
Yeah.
Like looking at ads for like uh, uh, State of Survival. I'm like, wow, that stuff isn't even in the game. Not even like remotely in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like, is that legal? I mean, they're based in the United States, so yes, everything's legal in the United States if it's coming from a business, pretty much. But I mean, it's just so inappropriate. And when I look on the App Store and look through games and look at their just the pictures they have for the game, I can tell very quickly that whatever I'm looking at isn't even in the game that I'm reading about.
Yeah.
And they don't care. They don't even have to. There doesn't have to be any truth at all.
Yeah, and we'll get to Shark's comment in a second. And like the other thing that I know is like, I see like YouTubers make sponsored pieces about these games, and they talk about stuff that like their their unbiased review of these games. Like it makes like no damn sense how they try to describe these games and try and make it sound like it's a fun game, and come and spend your money on these titles.
Well, I mean, most of their viewers are not unbiased. They're getting some sort of
Oh yes.
reward for whatever they're saying.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, for like people watching, I've yet to get a Raid Shadow Legends promotion. I think they must have seen our discussions and know they must have me flagged as don't try to send this guy a sponsorship deal. He's not going to work for it. Let's see.
Well,
Oh,
I mean, when I was writing for Unknown Player between 2001 and 2005, I'd had some incredibly in-depth reviews. I mean, people would go, and they'd read other reviews that were based on a few hours play, and then they'd come to me, and I'd have a 200-hour guarantee. I would not post a review of an MMO until I'd played the game at least 200 hours. So there was no comparison between the quality of my reviews in other reviews that are out there. But
mm-hmm,
we weren't getting paid, and that's why I was able to do that. Because
mm-hmm,
if we were getting paid, they'd pull the plug on us if I went into that type of depth in my review.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking about reviews, this is what Shark's comment was that, like, with some like Raid Shadow Legends, they have a 5-star scroll, but a 5-star score. But when he looked at it, like, he rarely saw anything over 3 stars in terms of its review. Like the
Mm,
reviews for some of these games seem very suspect to me.
mm, yeah. Oh yeah. It's not like the Steam store. Even the Steam store can get pretty suspect. But they only show you a few reviews, and they seem like they're carefully cultivated to promote the game. And when I read them, you can tell you can tell when
Yeah.
it's an honest review and when it's not an honest review. I mean, they just
Mm,
say, "Oh, this is the greatest thing," whatever, blah blah blah, but they don't actually go into any detail as to why it's great. Then it's not a helpful review at best.
yeah.
Um, it's the same thing with on Steam. You're reading a review. If they just say, "Oh, I really enjoyed this game," okay, great, but the useful reviews are the ones that go into the game mechanics and tell you what's good and what's bad, and then that helps you make a decide as whether that this is a game for you.
Mm-hmm.
and you don't see that on the mobile stores. The reviews are very short generally, and very vague.
Oh yes. And like another thing that like speaking about like Steam reviews, like one of the things that we saw Valve implement was it's not only current reviews but lifetime reviews. And
Hmm.
with the mobile scene, I think getting to like what Shark's on about with very rarely finding reviews above 3 stars these days. That I do wonder like how much like weight do these stars really have in terms of the algorithm? Like, if a game gets a bunch of 5 stars immediately, and then gets lots of 1 and 2 stars later, does it still count as having a 5 star review? Because I can't even imagine how many reviews Raid Shadow Legends must have at this point, being out for so long.
Well, I mean, Raid Shadow Legends will prompt me for a review, but it waited quite some time to make sure that I was, you know, their type of player. That that I was that their algorithm decided that I was enjoying their game, and that's when they asked for the review.
Mm-hmm.
They would not, and that way that they're creating a bias where they're promoting reviews from
Mm-hmm.
people who are enjoying the game, and not getting reviews from people who just stop playing right away. And so
Uh,
that's inherent bias right there.
yeah. And we see many mobile games will have like targeted ads or target promotions explicitly after you do you pull a rare character or you do something impressive. I remember with Marvel's Contest of Champions that literally every time you pull anything 4 star or higher, the game creates an ad or creates a limited time purchase for you, a second after you make that pull.
Well, in my widely read and translated top secrets of free to play gaming, or I don't know the exact title of the article now, but um, uh, I mentioned that even in that year, it was standard practice for games to adjust to what they were going to offer you based on how you were playing, and I got I got attacked. Gama Sutra and myself, but in the Gama Sutra had the lawyers from King came down on them and told them to pull that because they said they don't do that. And my response was that is that this is industry standard. If King's admitting that they're not doing it, then they're admitting that they're behind even the industry standard about doing this. And I'd be quite shocked. And I didn't pull the article. And and then I showed later, within a year or so, that they were bragging about having bought a company that this is the service they provided, that they could help adjust sales based on in-game metrics. So
Mm-hmm.
they caught up, and now they were doing what they were claiming they weren't doing, and they were upset that I had said that they were doing.
Mm. Yeah, like the closest I've gone to that was when I made a post talking about key resellers and stuff like I always forget their name. The big one that's always in the news that got in trouble.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I don't remember the name either.
Yeah, and they actually one of their representatives actually got in touch with me through Medium asking me to make changes to the article saying, "Oh, we never did this. That's just a lie." And I didn't do it, and I just like blocked the person after that.
Yeah, I don't know. My article actually gained more credibility and was even more widely read because of the attack by King and the threats by King, which I posted in the article. I added them to the article because I mean, if King wouldn't feel threatened or even respond to me unless that article was being read a lot, and it was very widely circulating.
Yeah, and I'm noticing that with a lot of the stuff that I'm getting on Medium too, that I've been posting, it's been getting I think a little bit more of a reach there. I think that's how they found that piece, and
Mm.
yeah, it's again like the stuff that we talk about. Many people don't really think about, or at least from the consumer standpoint, about what it means to play these games or these kinds of tricks. The whole loot box thing. I've gotten attacked by people on Gama Sutra saying I don't know what I'm talking about or it's perfectly fair. And somebody once tried to argue with me that like loot boxes are the same as getting loot in Diablo, which that just like I had to go on a rant about that when someone tried to say that to me.
Well, I mean, when this is how you make your money, you
Hmm.
don't like people shining light on that, and you're going to be trying to silence them if they shine a light on you. And if you're sophisticated like you are, then you can counter those fairly weak arguments and say, no, those two things aren't analogous.
Yeah, but I've had to defend myself because I made a negative review about Spelunky 2, the current
Hmm.
big name game that got a lot of attacks for, saying that wasn't the best. Yep. Now, as a quick time check, we are about an hour and 20 in. I'm trying to think. I do want to talk a little bit more about what you're currently working on, for people watching. Anything else regarding like any other like mobile related topics we haven't touched on that you'd like to go into discussion about?
Well, I mean, if we just go back to the fact to my key point that what's really would drive monetization of these games would be pure effects, and maybe talk a little bit more about what those are.
Okay.
And that would be a great segue into what I'm building now because it's all about pure effects.
All right.
I
So
mean,
then,
I mean, like the example I often use is people don't buy a Ferrari to drive down the street at 240 kilometers per hour or 160 miles per hour or so if you're in the United States and haven't switched to metric yet. Um, a person will buy a Ferrari to drive 10 miles an hour down the street and have everyone stare at them because they can. It's what I call peacocking effects. People will stop and look at you. Yeah, so the other guy might have a really fancy Corvette that can go just as fast, but it's not as cool. They're going to be looking at your car,
mhm.
and that's the type of thing you want. And people want to get that type of attention. They want to be seen as cool. They want to be featured on videos. They want people to want to hang out with them because they think they're cool because of what they got. So and it's less cool if you didn't earn it. I mean, not so much in real life because you know real life doesn't have the same sort of rules that games do. But in a game, if if they know that you actually had to work to get something as opposed to just spending money, then
Mhm.
then it's 10 times cooler.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
So trying to put this into a game, uh, such that one, people can show off their coolness, and two, that they can spend money on the coolness without it becoming uncool, is a very complicated design challenge. Because on the surface, it looks like it's an impossible challenge. It looks
Mhm.
like it would be impossible to get people to spend money, but not lose the but not lose the coolness factor at the same time. It is possible, but how it can be done is well, I mean, obviously it's the result of years of work on my part, and blockchain is a nice addition to that whole suite of design uh, elements because with blockchain now you can have an environment where people can sell their stuff anytime you want. You can allow people to sell their stuff anytime they want, and you can allow assets that are of extremely high value. In the current business model I have for CloudWalker, uh, I I
Mhm.
have the top asset in that game. I estimate that it will sell after about 2 years after the game will launch. It will sell each one, and there's more than one. Each one will sell for between $1.5 and $2 million. And and you think, well, why would somebody that your first reaction would be that's completely impossible because there's nothing I could make in a game that would be worth $1 million. Um, and just because I say, oh, this is $1 million, people aren't going to buy it for $1 million. I'm talking about something that will go on market, on auction, and not sold by me, but sold by another player, that will sell to another player, not me, for over $1 million. I don't get paid. I don't get any of that.
Mhm.
So this isn't about me trying to sell something for $1 million. This is me creating something with enough value in a game that players will value it between each other at
Mm.
over $1 million. And when that item sells, more than half of that will go to all the people that helped create that item. And part of the reason it's so valuable is it would take about 100 players 2 years to make that item working
Mm.
together. And so what you're really paying for is 200 man years of game labor. And that's what makes it that valuable. And that's how 100 people could make money, and in some countries maybe even a living wage, just playing a game for 2 years.
Mm. Now, what was the term you used for kind of like good monetization purchases again?
A good monetization purchase.
You said a term like for the topic. What was that? Peak. I forget what you were using. Not
Oh,
peacock.
peacocking. See, peacocking is a way of showing off something cool. If if I'm playing Arknights and I have a bunch of 6-star
Mm-hmm.
operatives, uh, no one cares because no one's seeing me use them.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
maybe if they still wouldn't care because it doesn't affect them in any way.
mm.
But
So
what if
like,
I'm on a team,
mm-hmm.
especially a large team? Because you got to realize I come from, I was in, I was in team sports before I got into gaming. I didn't get into gaming until I was in my, as an industry, until I was in my mid 30s. Before that, I was in elite and Olympic level sport. And so coaching on at that level, I really had to understand what makes a team effective in order to make, to bring value to the world's best teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm coming from that viewpoint when I come into gaming, where I'm trying to build team sports where you don't have all this toxicity and where the gameplay is fair and people will work very hard in order to be the best, but actually earn it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you about, like with like your example and what you're working with your games, as we've said over the course of this discussion, a lot of microtransactions are designed to either punish the player for not spending it or guilt tripping them into spending it. As we say, the whole paying for power in PvP, paying for it in a guild. How are you, I guess, or have you thought about how are you avoiding like that kind of toxicity with the games that you're making?
Well, I do want to sell things to people that they will think are valuable. I mean, I have no problem selling something for $1,000 in Cloudwalker, but what I would be selling wouldn't be something that's immediately all that useful.
Mm-hmm.
What I would sell would be something that I might call like I refer it internally as a symbiote, but it's something that you have to put a lot of work into, and skill based work, and eventually it'll transform into something else that's much more useful and much more rare,
Mm-hmm.
or it can be combined with something else to make something much more useful or rare or powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that way it mitigates the pay to win stench, because it still took a lot of work to develop it. And it also means that that it's going to be very rare because most people, you know, won't have the patience to do that. But this isn't for the rich player. This is for the super hardcore player that can then take that item, turn it around, and sell it possibly to someone else for quite a bit more than they originally paid for it.
Mm-hmm. And
Because you're really charging for their labor. They're charging for their expertise.
I'm assuming that you're not going to have any kind of like skips in the game. Like it's not like I can spend X amount of money and then I don't have to work for this product. I just automatically get it. Like you actually have to put in the time, the labor for it.
No skips. The things I would sell you would make you have to work even harder to progress. But then at the end, you end up with something cool that no one else has, or very few people will have. And the only things I allow players to sell between to other players are these kind of really super rare goodies,
Hmm.
things
Now,
that they really had to work hard for in order to sell to another player.
speaking
But
of,
that way, they'll be able to get a fair amount of money for it.
hmm. Speaking about that kind of, putting the work in to get something rare. One game I didn't like ask you to try out, but I want now I kind of wish I did. Did you ever play Warframe by any chance?
Oh, I kind of played like in the beta when it for before, when it was in beta. I don't think I've really played it since then. I know it's it's gotten quite a lot of good positive reviews for content that's been added post launch, but I haven't
Okay.
gone back to check it out.
The reason why I bring it up is that one of the things that they do that I think is very ingenious about it is that while you can certainly spend money to get a new Warframe or get a new gun, a lot of that is about crafting, and they use like real time values for the crafting system. That if you want that really powerful Warframe, you're going to need to find all the various parts for it, build it, and then it's yours to keep. And like you said, like what we've been like discussing, that when the player feels like they accomplish something, it gives, I think, more of an inherent value as opposed to just saying, "Here's $1,000, give me my fancy helmet or my fancy suit."
No, absolutely. But does Warframe let them sell that thing they've made after they made it?
I don't think so. I think it's still just a one way kind of shop.
See, if somebody could put a lot of work into something like that and then sell it,
Mm-hmm.
don't you think that would be motivation for them to do that because they could actually make some real money for being that good a player?
Mm-hmm. Shark asked in chat, symbiotes seem like a cool thing. Do you have any examples of that in a card game? Hmm.
In a what game?
In a card game or a deck builder? Hmm.
I did. If he's asking me if I did this in Gods Unchained, then the answer is no.
Oh, I think you kind of broke out there. I didn't hear the answer.
If he's asking me if I did something like that in Gods Unchained, then the answer is
Okay.
no.
Yeah, and
And I can't really talk about what I did at Immutable, so
mm-hmm.
um,
But
other than what's public knowledge.
uh, for the game that you're working on now, what was the name of it for people watching us?
Cloudwalker.
Cloudwalker. So it sounds very much, as you said, a game that the whole idea of player to player transactions is going to be a very integral part of it. And like we've said, it is a very big difference compared not just to free to play games, but to pretty much a lot of titles out there. And as we said earlier, like the only game that I can think of that does something along those lines, or at least in some scale, would be something like Second Life.
Well, I mean, most games figure that they're going to get most of the money they're going to get out of you in the first week or two.
Mm-hmm.
And in my whales don't swim in the desert paper, I talk about how it takes 18 or 19 days before a whale spends their first dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you want to get the whales, you have to give them, you have to prove to them that you have substantial long-term content that could make this their new ride, their new game of choice. And here in Cloudwalker, I'm not aiming at to make money off you in the first 2 weeks. In fact, there's almost nothing you can spend money on in the first 2 weeks. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, almost nothing. I mean, you could. There's a few things maybe you could buy from other players, but not much of value. Most of what I'm selling is content that you won't even reach for the first year or two. Uh, and so this is the type of game where I would expect monetization to start off very low and then get astronomical after a year or two. It's a complete reverse of common monetization philosophy.
Oh, and Charles, if there were any examples, right, either real or not, of that in a CCG like card game, because he's working on a Neon Continuum, and he's trying to get some notes and feedback from you.
Well, I mean, Magic Gathering made a lot of, had some cards that ended up being quite valuable, uh, partly because they're quite rare,
Mm-hmm.
but also because they were quite powerful. Uh, and we did our best to mirror that model to a fair extent in Gods Unchained,
Mm-hmm.
where the unique cards, where there actually was literally just one of those cards sold for like $60,000 between players.
And again, like the challenge, of course, of this is the fact that, as you say, if it's player to player transactions, they're the ones who are kind of dictating,
Mm-hmm.
what this price is going to be. And I guess like with Cloud Runner, are you doing a
Cloud Walker.
Cloud Walker? I'm sorry, with Cloud Walker. I was off. It's running, it's walking there. With Cloud Walker, like, is there any information in the game, or do you give the player information about how to price things, or like, do they have any idea of like how the economy works, or is it all going to be on them to figure this out?
I give them some clues in the form of, I may be selling them something that then I'm expecting them to transform and then resell later. So obviously they're going to want to sell it for more than they bought it for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a clue. But other than that, I don't. It's really going to be just based on what's the availability. There are some things that players will not want to sell because they're quite valuable to them.
Mm-hmm.
But if they do sell them, other players will likely buy them at an extreme premium because you would have to sacrifice your own progression in order to sell those things. So I wouldn't expect there to be a whole lot of those things being sold. And when they did, I would expect the prices to be very high, which is fantastic for the players and also looks good for me to show off just how much the stuff sells for in my
Mm-hmm.
game between players. The threat there is bots trying to undermine that and take advantage of that market because bot doesn't care about their progression or future success. They just and so you would normally think that would be a real threat, but just this week I figured out a way that I think finally after 15 years to completely eliminate bots from my design. So I'm really excited about that.
Nice. That'll probably be a discussion for another time as well. But we could get into a lot on that.
Well, I'm not going to be sharing that for a while because that's a super top secret.
All right. So, besides selling players, the equipment and materials they need to do stuff, are you going to have like personalization options? Again, the whole peacocking, you exclusive skins, exclusive, clothing, etc.
Well, this is a subject of internal debate. I'm got to be careful about that because, like, if I have five creatures and they all look different, I'm going to want to be able to have those differences be a clue to the other person as to what they're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just reskin it, then that hides what their actual characteristics of the critter are. So I'm losing some of my options there in game design if I allow some things like combat units to be reskinned.
Mm-hmm.
So probably not going to allow that sort of thing. But I do give options as far as like your entire. I mean, I don't know. It's probably too early to share this, but I let you basically grow your entire environment, what I call a biome, and
Mm-hmm.
and you can customize that a lot, especially over the 2 years. And it's not just cosmetic. When you change your biome, it affects everything you do in that biome, including the creatures you recruit or the teams you can build.
Okay. In terms of the actual gameplay loop itself, is there anything you can go into detail about regarding Cloud Walker now, or is it still too early in development?
Generally, Cloudwalker is about you going into the cloud. The AI has as an AI has come in and there's a virtual space that was created by scientists, and something happened, and the AI an AI came in and corrupted it. And you're going in like as explorers to find out what happened to the first team, and as a result, and in a way, the AI is like playing games with you, and you land here hoping it would be like this utopia, but you're actually in a hostile environment and you're trying to survive. Um, the AI is not necessarily trying to like eliminate you, but it's testing you, and you need to work with nature in this new world. And if you're successful, uh, then the biome you're in actually transforms into a more advanced biome, and new options become available, new creatures become available, uh, new playing arenas become available, and this is completely a team-based game. You will not be successful. You may not even survive. I may literally just kill off players who are not successful in team play, uh, in progressing, because the AI is testing you, and so teams will initially start off as like a, I'm aiming at for the smallest initial teams being 15. You'll know everyone on your team, and everyone has to cooperate, like naked and afraid, but like with 15 people. And eventually, as you progress through the game, this can reach 150 players on a team. Again, everyone cooperating together to both survive and build the stuff that they want. So it's designed to be hyper social, hyper peacocking, play to earn, fully tradable. Uh, it's basically, I'm trying to make the Tesla of games, where it's just a really an ultra premium experience that's very long term, and in theory we could just keep building on this game forever.
Hmm. And speaking about kind of keeping players invested in it, I guess, are there any things that you're doing to avoid kind of, we talked about this before, with regards to making the game that forces somebody to play it, and the kind of mental stress that gets put on them because of that? Are you doing anything in Cloud Walker to kind of avoid that or minimize it?
Well, I'm minimizing the amount of hours per day they have to play,
Okay.
because I don't want them to have to choose between real life and the game. So it's not about the grind, but I would say they will have to participate every day, or they could hurt their team. Just like when I was in team sports
Mm-hmm.
for over a decade. Uh, it, if I was competing and I got hit by a bus once, literally, um, and I was on the sidewalk when I got hit,
Mm-hmm.
and I was out of action for a couple of weeks, but I still showed up to practice every day. It doesn't matter what happens unless you're in the hospital. You show up to practice every day, even if you can't compete that or train that day, and that's the team spirit, and that's the kind of feeling I want to build also in the game, where even if you know your ability to participate will be limited a day, you still show up because you're part of a team,
Yeah. All right. I
and you're
guess,
possibly making money while you're playing.
yeah, that's certainly true as well. And with Cloud Walker, it sounds like there will be the opportunity for people to make money with it, obviously.
Oh, we're totally trying to make that a key element of the game. Play to earn is going to be very key.
All right. So, in terms of, I guess, logistics, anything regarding, like, do you have an estimated time for when people will be able to check it out?
Well, I mean, a lot of this depends on how things go with the investors and such. So we're still in that stage where we're raising funds. So I can't give you any numbers
Okay.
on time frame yet. But I think we'll be able to do it fairly quickly, because I'm not trying to design something that's overly complex from a production standpoint.
All right. I guess anything else regarding Cloud Walker that we didn't discuss that you would like to bring up now?
No, I just hope it becomes I expect it to be copied, and I hope it gets copied, because I would like to see us move away from the era of Excel spreadsheet games that are very isolating and have a lot of fun pain and such, and gambling mechanics, and just move towards games that mirror real life better, but better than real life.
All right. Definitely best of luck with that. So, to end the cast on, then, any final thoughts on mobile monetization in general? Anything at all to kind of end on?
Well, I mean, until we get past the area of data-driven design and allow developers to start innovating again, we're not going to see innovation. Most of the innovation right now you're seeing is in the indie space, coming from very small development teams of like a dozen most people, mostly on Steam. Uh, the only other innovation you're seeing is basically on the production quality. You know, graphics are advancing, but even then, you're not seeing that translate into more players. We had bigger games back in when we were playing EverQuest or World of Warcraft or Shattered Galaxy. The team sizes have gotten smaller over time, not bigger, and that just boggles my mind because that seem to be the one thing you'd want to apply your technology to.
All right. Well, yeah, definitely a lot of great discussions tonight, and hopefully, we can speak again in less time. Maybe the world will be in a better place by the time of our next discussion.
Yeah, I feel bad for you. I'm pretty safe over here in Australia. I worry a lot about my friends and family in the States.
Yeah. We were just talking about this before we started the stream that, like, for us gamers, like, this isn't, anything new. We've been isolating for a long time.
Yeah, I have at least two family members who have gotten COVID so
Oof.
far, so it's real for me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully things will improve, and I hope to hear good things about Cloudwalker in the future.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it.
All right. To end the cast, you have anything social media or any sites people can check things out with?
Well, I mean, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm not writing so much for Game Kama Sutra these days because I don't have the freedom to write everything I want to over there. But as soon as I have more to put out about Cloudwalker, I will definitely put it out and let you know.
All right. Well, Ramin, as always, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you. It's my evening. I know I think you are definitely ahead of me right now, so I'm not sure what time it is for you at this
Oh,
moment.
yeah, it's actually like noon or 1 o'clock, I think, here.
All right. Well, as always, thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, let's schedule do something like this again in the future.
All right, my pleasure. And it was always good hanging out with you, Josh.
All right, and hoping to have you back on for one of our roundtable talks as well in the future too, if you ever have more free time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been kind of a recluse. I've really been working hard on this blockchain thing the last year.
All right. Well, again, it sounds very interesting, and definitely curious to see where things go with Cloudwalker and kind of like that whole ultra premium model.
Hmm.
All right. Well, folks, we're going to end things here for this discussion. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new, be sure, as always, to check out the Discord and Patreon link down below. If you are a developer working on a game or teaching design or just want to come on and talk about video games with me, please reach out and get in touch. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBicer. I know for you, Ramin, you don't do too much in terms of social media other than through LinkedIn.
I keep a low profile since I got death threats in 2001 with my home address on it.
But again, we will hopefully be able to have you back on in the future. And maybe you have a great rest of your afternoon and I guess for the evening for everyone else watching.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that said, folks, we're going to end things here. So come back for our daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.